Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from in the world, and a warm welcome to the launch event of the United Nations system-wide guidance on bilateral labor migration agreements. My name is Nozipho Shabalala, and it is an absolute privilege to serve you as your moderator, especially to do so during Migration Week. Now, as we get ready to get into our process for our launch today, let us be reminded of the importance of rights-based labor migration agreements, especially in the context of them being a tool to enable migrant workers to move safely through regular migration pathways, and of course, a pathway for us to achieve the Global Compact on Migration. And so this launch event is going to be all about socializing the guidance, and it is, of course, going to be all about creating the space to share information on the content, on the scope, on the guiding principles, especially as the BLMAs, of course, are developed, implemented, and evaluated. And so in this launch event, you're going to hear a range of voices from different stakeholders who've all actively contributed to getting us to this point. But your voice is also important today. And so I do want to encourage you to use the chat functionality to send through any questions or comments. We will also be having a panel discussion and a Q&A session where we will be inviting some of our stakeholders to make a few comments and statements. And so to get us started and to offer the official opening remarks, it's my absolute pleasure to hand over to Madame Amy Mweden. She is the Deputy Head of the Secretariat of the UN Network on Migration, and she kicks us off at this moment. Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and good morning and good afternoon to all. It's my pleasure to join you here today to open today's launch of the network's global guidance on bilateral labor migration agreements. Let me from the outset congratulate our network colleagues from ILO and IOM for their leadership in bringing forth this guidance. As co-leads of the Thematic Working Group on the same topic, they work closely with a number of diverse working members. And if I could just take a moment to acknowledge a number of them, the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations, or the AFL-CIO, Building and Woodworkers International, the UN Expert Working Group on Women's Human Rights.
Recording in progress.
In the Global Compact for Migration, FAO, the International Organization of Employers, the International Trade Union Confederation, Migrant Forum Asia, the Platform for International Cooperation on Undocumented Migrants, Public Services International, Solidarity Center, the UN Major Group on Children and Youth, UN Women, WHO, and the International Migration Research Center of the Basili School of International Affairs of Wilfrid Laurier University. We are very grateful for the diverse group of experts without whom this guidance today would not be possible. And rightfully so, because as we know, the development of bilateral labor mobility agreements, being one of the many objectives of the Global Compact, requires the engagement and support of a multitude of stakeholders, truly giving effect to both the whole of government and the whole of society approach of the guiding principles in the Global Compact itself. Similarly, labor mobility agreements support the Sustainable Development Goals by protecting labor rights and promoting safe and secure working environments, while also addressing inequality among states. The aspirations and objectives of both the Global Compact and the SDG framework require us to enhance our collaborative efforts in order for both to be successfully implemented. So as the network, we're very proud to launch this global guidance as an essential tool to support the implementation of the Global Compact by showcasing those practices used by governments, while also providing the criteria against which governments, workers, and employers, organizations, and others may assess those existing practices. This guidance launched today comes at a very opportune time because we are exactly 3 months away from the International Migration Review Forum, which will be the first global review of the Global Compact on Migration. As many of you know, the network has also launched a pledging initiative last December to build momentum towards the IMRF, so that we use the IMRF not only as a stock take on what we've achieved, but also to ensure future collective action towards the implementation of the Global Compact. And I trust today's guidance that's being launched today could provide a very good basis for many to consider pledges in the context of BLMAs. Finally, let me say I'm pleased that today's launch is taking part of the network's Migration Week, which is an umbrella event for all of our partners on activities in preparation for the IMRF in 3 months. This launch, amongst the other Migration Week activities, sets a marker for looking towards this first forum. I wish you a very productive discussion today, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Amy, for those opening remarks and, of course, setting the context and reminding us of the power of what's possible when stakeholders come together in a whole of government and whole of society approach, when we pool our collaborative efforts and the momentum that can be achieved in that regard. Amy, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move from Amy now towards two of our speakers who are going to be setting the scene for us. They're going to be outlining the background and the nature of the guidance, its application. And so as they present, I also encourage you to use the chat function in case there are any questions and comments that we might put to them a little bit later in our program. And so with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Michelle Layton, who is, of course, a director at the Labour Migration Branch for the ILO, and she is going to be presenting alongside Marina Manke, who is the head of division for Labour Migration and Human Development at the IOM. So a special partnership in play as I hand over the floor to them.
Thank you so much, Nosy. And really, it's such a delight to be here at this launching event and to have ILO and IOM able to present the new UN system-wide guidance on bilateral labor migration agreements. It's been quite a work in the making, and we're very happy to share it with you today. We, as you can see on the screen, and I hope you can see, we have a PowerPoint presentation, very brief, but it will run through some of the elements of the guide, and I'll be presenting together with my colleague, Marina Manke at IOM. The global guidance is not just a tool for member states, and I'll start with that because it's a tool for all stakeholders. And we hope all of the stakeholders on today will share it, will read it, will be able to work with it, and of course, communicate with us, because it really is a tool for everyone. It's based on international human rights, it's based on international labor standards, and it considers a plethora of issues, but particularly gender, a whole of government approach, and really how to engage all the right stakeholders, including business, employers and workers organizations, trade unions, civil society, and more. And importantly, we think that this guidance can serve as a baseline to achieving safe, fair, and regular pathways for migration. So let me begin by just giving a brief context of the work. And if Paul, thanks, Paul. ILO's data show that migrant workers comprise 169 million of the 272 million migrants globally. They represent 70% of all working age migrants. This means that migration for employment is the primary reason most migrants cross borders, and women make up nearly half. Now, this is an increase of about 5 million workers since the last estimate, but it's a 12% increase over the past 6 previous years. We expect it to continue. The ILO and the World Bank carried out research on bilateral agreements some time ago around the world. This table shows you results of about 147 bilateral agreements. Most of these covered low-skilled migrant workers. Now, in our examination, we saw considerable gaps in these agreements, sometimes, of course, more prevalent than in some regions than others. But the table shows that there have been serious gaps in gender considerations, in stakeholder engagement, as well as social dialogue, social protection. And of course, we've also seen that rights and wages and wage protection, skills development are mainly absent from these agreements. And this tracks our findings and work we've done together with IOM in Africa when we examined bilateral agreements there in that region. But this has become all the more critical as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic really exposed that while migrant workers are serving on the front lines to help societies and work in essential services like healthcare, agriculture, transport, and more, they are some of the least protected in the workplace. Bilateral agreements could be constructed as better frameworks to guarantee migrants are protected in the workplace and in our societies, and they could help address labor shortages, including supply chains, to help them run smoother. If we go to the next slide, you'll see the guidance that we are launching today is the first UN system-wide guidance. It provides a comprehensive framework for improving cooperation and rights protection, and it's underpinned, as I said, by international human rights and labor standards, and these are spelled out in the guide. Now, this relates, of course, to the call in the Global Compact, Objective 5, to develop human rights-based and gender-responsive bilateral, regional, and multilateral labor mobility agreements with sector-specific standard terms of employment in cooperation with relevant stakeholders and drawing on relevant international labor organization standards, guidelines, and principles in compliance with international human rights and labor law. And that's why I thought it was important to put this on the slide to remind us the close link with the Global Compact. Now, the guide itself, and we're just showing you a bit of the table of contents, has quite a lot of provisions and practices in it, but it's laid out first with the scope and definitions, and then has two main parts. The first part is general principles of human rights and labor rights, and these are, of course, important to all stakeholders. There's also the second part, which is the operational guidelines. And the operational guidelines provide many, many practical experiences. And there's a third part, which is the annex. And the annex contains all the relevant sources that you would need in constructing, monitoring, and implementing bilateral labor migration agreements. And it has helpful checklists. The general principles underpinning the guidelines include 11 such areas, and with each one there are examples presented. These include human rights generally, fair recruitment, access to information, migration status, occupational safety and health issues, a wide array of issues around social protection, contract and wage protection, governance, qualifications and skills, remittances, return, and labor market reintegration. You can see it is quite broad. And since the pandemic, we know the return and reintegration of migrant workers is a particular concern. So the guidance provides examples of practices on how governments can respond while protecting the rights of all workers. If we look at the operational guidance, this section of the guide provides analysis and practical information and practices on each step in preparing, developing, negotiating, implementing, and so on of bilateral agreements. Provisions such as responding to gender issues are included and addressed, as well as stakeholder engagement and how to do that and how different countries are doing that. The operational guidelines section, as I said, is really advised for all stakeholders. We hope all of you will be able to take a look and utilize this, but it does identify specific and respective roles and responsibilities of different parties, including countries of origin and destination. The guide also looks at, through the operational section, the entire labor migration cycle, from how to help migrants prepare, including pre-departure and training, the recruitment processes and travel they'll go through, contract terms, the workplace abroad in the destination country, and return and reintegration. And based on the specific needs, countries can use the guidance to better understand the standards and practices that can be put in place to improve or to develop new bilateral agreements. For example, on There needs to include provisions on recognition of foreign qualifications, recognition of prior learning, services to facilitate skills and job matching for business and workers for skills development. The guidance also looks at several sectors a bit more deeply on specific topics: seasonal workers, health workers, and domestic workers. These sectors are included, and they are because these are sectors in which workers may have specific or different vulnerabilities that we believe should be considered in the provision of bilateral agreements depending on their scope. The guidance provides some analysis and more focused advice for these sectors. The guidance also incorporates and complements additional, more focused guides, which we have produced, such as these shown on skills development and recognition for bilateral agreements. And these are also available online. We'll post a link in the chat box, but these can be used together. So let me stop here now and turn to my colleague, Marina Menka, who will take us through the future steps. Over to you, Marina.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you everyone who is joining us today. In particular, also gratitude is to our partners who work so hard on this tool, and as well as the team behind that comprehensive instrument, of course, from ILO and IAM, but also I just screamed through the colleagues and the list of participants. We have a number of colleagues from regional offices joining today. So what I'll use the next few minutes of following up on the presentation of the content of the guide, Michelle itself, I will just mention and share with you colleagues, partners, distinguished guests from governments, a few ideas how we believe this guide could be then utilized immediately in your work, and then how it can become a powerful instrument to continue working on collaboration across countries to ensure that indeed migrants get maximum support from all stakeholders. As Michelle mentioned, it's a multi-stakeholder task. It's a cross-border task. No organization can perform it alone. So how can the countries benefit? What is the actual benefit? So we see various application cases for this instrument. The first is, of course, the importance of using it as a reference to ensure that your agreement or memorandum of understanding, whatever you're working on, collaboration approach to look into labor migration. So this is in line with international human rights and labor standards. So it's a check to ensure that all the rights are upheld. Of course, another very important application is capacity development for governments, for partners, because very often it is quite a technical area. It's becoming different depending even on the sector, as Michelle mentioned. So it's really how to ensure that we have knowledge and expertise, and not only based on one country experience, but really transferable across different countries' corridors. We also believe that this tool will be useful to boost your negotiation skills, strategic approaches towards placing BLMAs, not necessarily only in the context of just supporting labor migration, but broader migration governance. Again, relevance to the Global Compact for Migration. Consultation process with social partners. Again, we'll hear today from our partners who were directly involved in the development of this tool later. So indeed, it's really not only a government response or responsibility, it really requires coordination with employers, labor market stakeholders to ensure that we find best solutions for migrants and all involved. And finally, some examples, as we were working on the guide and it was still a draft, we already started applying it in specific country context or regional context. And for instance, we supported the stakeholders within IGAD when they were putting their own guidelines within this RAC, as well as with African Union within our joint labor migration program. We also applied that as a tool. So, timelines. Looking forward, we have already made the presentation, anticipatory presentation of the guide on the 3rd of November. So to the champion countries, So today we are really launching it officially. So the link is available. Please start looking into that. There might be some minor bugs. We know that we worked literally until yesterday, but really for us, this is the product. This has been coordinated through multiple circles. It's really the one which now we are promoting today. Ahead of time, of course, Amy referred to the IMRF in May. That will be important milestone, but also by end of the year, we do want to start applying this tool within specific corridors in the context of specific countries. So we are now, our request to everyone, please come to us. Please come to our colleagues in the regional offices in the countries and do start suggesting how we can be engaging and supporting, making your work easier, but also aligned with the work in other countries and globally. So we mentioned already application, yes. So concretely, how can it be used? It can be it can be used in terms of in the process of developing the bilateral labor agreements, but also it can be useful to define specific terms of the agreement, as already was mentioned by Michelle. So we envisage that not necessarily only as a tool during the negotiation stage or drafting. We really believe that a lot of agreements are not necessarily put into practice because some of the coordination aspects are not aligned. So it's really about monitoring the effectiveness of the agreements and really working further on elaborating further solutions and instruments. So, and again, capacity development was also mentioned. When you pilot, and again, today we hope, Noisy, that we will really hear from the participants with concrete ideas, suggestions of how they can envisage potentially the usage of these guidelines. And then what we need to keep in mind when we do that is we need to think whether we want to really use that in a country context, or maybe we'll look into a corridor approach. And really that would require coordination between country of origin and destination. So we need to keep in mind which stage of the agreement. As I said already, not necessarily it has to be used only at the stage of the negotiation, but throughout the cycle, which other stakeholders need to be taken into the process, and then what would be the realistic timelines and the outcome. So here's my request. What can governments and partners help us and everyone now that we are launching the tool? Please provide feedback, and both on the text. This is a text we want it to be relevant. We don't want it to be lying on the shelf. We want it to become concrete. So we know that the text is finalized, coordinated, but at the same time, we are welcoming your feedback. If you have other ideas, other examples, please continue sharing directly with us, but also with our representatives and colleagues in the field. Please help us with the dissemination. So we want to ensure that since we've invested so much time and resources, we want to make it useful and relevant for everyone. Piloting, yes, we want to make it a concrete example. We want to work with concrete governments and partners in a concrete context, because then we can become really impactful and relevant. Also, we are looking forward to extracting lessons learned and then share experiences. And of course, looking to continue advocating for the importance of the bilateral labor agreements, the importance of Objective 5 on safe and regular pathways for migration, as well as all other objectives of the compact. I'll stop here and looking forward to hearing from each of you today. Over.
Thank you very much, Marina, and thanks to you as well, Michelle. I think the invitation is loud and clear. I heard and on a number of occasions. Let's partner together. Let us know how you can engage, support, and the request right at the end. Give us feedback, help us disseminate, put up your hand for piloting, bring in others, and let's share experiences. And of course, we'll come back and make sure that that invitation lands very clearly when we begin to wrap up our conversation. But before that, we are now going into a very exciting part of our program, and that's really to open up the space a little bit and really to respond to some of the questions that Marina has put to us. She says she's really looking to hear from the voices how we might make use of this guidance and what we'd like to see in terms of other actors also making use of the guidance. And so as we go into the panel discussion, I want to thank Marina and I want to thank Michelle. I do want to invite now into the virtual room, if you will, Minister Natalie Alvarez. Minister, thank you so much. She is, of course, the Deputy Minister of Employment and Social Welfare in Costa Rica, and we're really excited, Minister, that you are here with us. We know that you're also a member of the National Migration Council, which of course is an advisory body of the government on migration policies, amongst, of course, a big portfolio around looking at the national strategy to transition to the formal economy and leading the initiatives on employment, innovation, and social security. Thank you very much, Minister Alvarez, for making the time to join us. Ladies and gentlemen, you also see on your screen, Madame Paula Simonetti. She is the Director of the Equality Department at the ITUC, a face that I'm very happy to see again. So thank you very much, Paula, for being here with us. And we look forward to leaning into your voice as well. We know that Paula does extensive work as she leads trade union engagement, specifically around the sustainable development goals at national, regional, and global levels. And so as we were listening in, of course, to Michelle and Marina talking about the importance of how the guidance creates a bridge between, of course, what's happening on the ground at a national level and an alignment to global framework. So your voice is going to be quite important in this conversation as well, Paula. Allow me also, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome Madame Stephanie Winne. She is the head of stakeholder engagement at the IOE, the International Organization of Employers. Stephanie, it's an absolute pleasure to see you on the screen. And we know, of course, I think you joined the IOE in 2016, and you've been leading at the forefront when it comes to the Global Forum on Migration and Development. And so we're going to be tapping into you for a lot of your insights and your experience in that regard. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be calling on a range of speakers to come forward and to make statements as well. I do see Mr. Levinson Alcantara on the screen already, and I will come to him a little bit later in the conversation. He is, of course, from the Philippines Overseas Employment Administration. He's a director there, and so we look forward to hearing from him. We'll also hear from the permanent mission of Portugal to the United Nations office, and I do believe that Mr. Mario Martins is standing by to do that. But maybe let me come to you, Minister, first, and I'm going to maybe just go with a very simplistic question, because Marina spends quite a lot of time talking about the benefits of the guidance, but let's come to the context of Costa Rica. What do you see as the key benefits for Costa Rica on the back of this guidance?
Bien, muchísimas gracias y muy buenos días.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you, with Stephanie and all the attendants in this meeting in the morning in Costa Rica. It's an honor to be here in this event, and we would like to thank you from the government of Costa Rica for the invitation. The context in which this guideline can be applied to Costa Rica it's quite important for us, and I would like to highlight some elements from our country in order to respond from our experience that we have had as a country. Around 10% of our population is migrant population with a formal status, and there's an important segment of people who are undocumented. Before the pandemic, there was a high rate of unemployment, around 11%, and a level of informality close to 45%, which in many other cases, in many other countries, is related with migrant population in an irregular situation. In the case of Costa Rica, there's also a migration dynamic which is close to our neighboring countries, Nicaragua and Panama, and it's quite different to the ones that you see in North and Central America. This is an important point which led us to the experience that we can see clearly in this guideline. We are a country that is committed with human rights and social dialogue, and consequently, we've been working since the 90s, from the last century, in binational mechanisms to order migration. And this is related to the guideline in the sense that the guideline captures and reflects many of the principles that we have been incorporating in these agreements. Some of them with Nicaragua, for instance, were closed in the 90s. So green cards were given for some workers to stay permanently, and also what we tried is to regularize their stay and to administer it properly. Since then, we reflected the importance of strengthening labor inspections. At the beginning of the century, we developed the co-development model, which regulates the procedure to access for Nicaraguan workers to access the countries for the agriculture, the industry, and building and domestic sectors. This is also important to take into account because it is also linked to the guidelines. This agreement establishes the actors, in this case, it's employers in Costa Rica who need to request or do all the red tape in order to have these workers working in these industries. This mechanism was created by governments, and it allows local companies, not agencies, to do this procedure at the level of the labor inspectorate. Neither of these countries is regulating placement agencies. We didn't do it back then. We haven't done it yet here. In the case of Costa Rica and Panama, we have technical mechanisms and technical commitments in order to implement actions to improve the living and working conditions of families, especially indigenous families. We have a specific migration for the production of coffee, mostly indigenous workers. They started in the 70s, in the last century, and they work with the families. These workers work together with the families. So the pandemic has had an important impact on them. What do they find in Costa Rica? We had difficulties in the labor markets. We had binational agreements with neighboring countries. And there were also important challenges to regularize migrant workers, which were already in the country many occasions. As other countries, we made some measures to face the pandemic, like closing our borders. As we said, what happened was that we clearly saw how dependent we were on migrant labor in the agricultural and exporting sector. At that time, we saw clearly that we needed to have an exemption for these migrant workers. We linked this with some of the principles stated in the guideline. We had to develop mechanisms that we will show briefly based on social dialogue with international and local partners, with health authorities, migration authorities, agricultural authorities from different countries, with local governments representing the hosting communities, the productive sector at a local and national scale. We accepted some important responsibilities in terms of labor and health, and also with workers. In the case of indigenous workers, there was a special challenge, which was the cultural and ethnic component. We worked with the ministries and the authorities in the different regions as well. This clearly defined the co-governance with all the partners involved along the process. This is something that hadn't happened before. Before, we just had the labor ministry, companies, and migration agencies. So here we could define a way of working, including all the different authorities involved. In the case of Nicaragua, it was formalized with a binational agreement. In the case of Panama, there was a coordination with the technical instances and local authorities, and with the principle of the guideline, we hope to close an agreement in the short term with Panama. What does this procedure mean? Well, companies need to provide a list with all the people that they want to hire to the Labor Ministry of Costa Rica, which checks the legality of the company, and then our recommendation is distributed with all other authorities involved in the process, health authorities, the labor inspectorate, the agricultural inspection, and also including Panama health authorities. Because in the case of indigenous workers from Panama, they need to provide a health certificate issued by Panama. And on the second half of cycle, we saw, well, there was a request from the government of Panama so that the Costa Rica Labor Ministry should coordinate the dates for providing these certifications. So, and this is something that is done at the border. This is a milestone for Costa Rica. We had never achieved such a level of immediacy, and people are provided with the documentation at the very moment when they start, when they cross the border. In this case, we could transform this in a permanent process, which will help us to ensure the working conditions of workers. What does this mechanism include? We review the ID in the case of indigenous migrant workers in their language, Navere, and also the registry at the level of the Social Security Institute. Also, a register of their life signs, and also it is included in an app to issue alerts. This has been used in order to verify the working conditions of workers. This also meant that producers should transfer workers to their sites. It was also something new. This transfer, which is part of international good practices, this hadn't been regulated clearly in Costa Rica. This all was supported with information for indigenous peoples, and we worked together with the ILO and the OIM in order to carry out this process. I would like to conclude by mentioning some elements. We created a specific public policy, including cultural elements regarding the indigenous populations. It has worked very well. We've had no problems in terms of xenophobia or health outbreaks. Some people were hospitalized, but fortunately there were no casualties. And despite all these challenges that we've had, we achieved a high level of security or safety for everyone. These measures can ensure that workers work in a formal environment and with decent work levels. And in this case, some of these populations were not properly registered. So this is a step in order to ensure that their rights are protected and that they have access to services. Legally, I would like to mention that these mechanisms are long-term processes, and they help to ensure decent working conditions with social security protection, with a legal contract, and all of this based on binational agreement. The result of this commitment is that now we have a process. Today there are going to be some working sessions in order to turn this mechanism that was developed as part of the pandemic into a permanent mechanism to ensure safe, quick, and efficient procedures. This is based on legal evolution. We want to do this well. And we think that this guideline is a good support for countries that want to do things well, because it reminds us of several key elements based on decent work it can adjust to different contexts, and it also places people at the center. And this is something essential for any public policy that we would like to develop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. It's a very comprehensive response, but certainly, Minister, speaking not only to the benefits of the guidance, which we've heard loud and clear, but also as you're speaking about the areas in which this guidance can then be applied and the impact that it might have on other actors. I know you spoke about the red tape that might be reduced for employers. So I'm keen to also hear from Stephanie, what her thoughts from an employer's perspective are in that regard. So Stephanie, as I come to you, I'd like to maybe give you two questions to consider at the same time. Maybe a brief comment on what you see as the direct benefits for employers, but also the second element of your question, if you could also make a comment on the use of this guidance and how employers might also like to see other social partners adopting and using this guidance. So let me bring your voice in and let's listen in for a moment. Over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Nozipo. And it's really a pleasure to be here for IOE today, together with Deputy Minister Alvarez Rojas and Paola, as well as with many other participants joining. And it was really great to hear concrete actions, mechanisms put in place in Costa Rica and the role of employers in the framework of this Costa Rica-Panama migration corridor. So obviously IOE welcomes the publication of this guidance as a result of a long consultation and drafting process, as Michelle was also saying in her introduction. And we really thank all colleagues who have contributed to this guidance under the leadership of ILO and IOM. So Nozipo, to answer your questions, when we helped draft it and when we contributed to the content of this guidance, we really thought of it as a tool to guide, to assist countries to craft and implement bilateral agreements, which would serve the interest not only of the two countries, the signing countries, but also of the other stakeholders engaged in the labor migration process, the workers, their families, the employers, industries, all of the stakeholders. And Michelle referred to the GCM Objective 5. We do believe that this guidance will also contribute to further GCM objectives, including Objective 6 on cross-border recruitment, Objective 18 on skills development and recognition. And at IOE, our members have engaged on these three objectives, 5, 6, 18. And we believe that any bilateral labor mobility agreement should address these three issues of legal pathways, responsible recruitment, and skills recognition harmonization. Now, those bilateral labor agreements should be a complement to efficient national immigration frameworks and not a substitute for them. And that's, I think, a key message from the employer side. Indeed, we believe those agreements can be an important tool in migration governance. They can have a key role to support cooperation among governments, to support skills matching in industries in need of defined skill sets, and to protect the migrant workers in their journey from their countries of origin to the countries where they will be working. And these agreements are an international implementation tool that can be utilized in support of national labor migration policies, but it cannot be a substitute for them. Addressing skills shortages and the protection of migrant workers should not be granted only through bilateral agreements between two governments. Solving the cross-border recruitment challenges, and there are a few, will not be done exclusively through bilateral labor agreements, but rather mainly through efficient national legislation and thorough implementation of those legislations. And Michelle also was saying in her introduction that most of the migrants move for employment. So we really should not neglect national frameworks for all of those other workers who would not fall in the scope of the bilateral labor agreement. To your second question, Nozipo, how we would be using this guideline, guidance. I think any bilateral labor migration agreement to be effective needs buy-in from the stakeholders in the migration journey. And here I obviously will refer to the buy-in of the private sector stakeholders. And to achieve this buy-in, the collaboration with employers needs to take place from the outset, not after the agreement is designed, drafted, and signed. That's too late. Employers in countries of origin and destination can support in the design of the agreement, in identifying skill shortages and industries where skills are most needed. And employers in both countries can contribute to ensuring that the qualifications and skills recognition are in line with labor market demands. So really, we should make sure that this skills development and recognition components are part of those clauses. So consultation with Employers Federation should take place really when the agreements are being developed. So this is really a call for governments to tap into the resources of their national employers federations to ensure that they are part of the discussion. We will raise awareness on the tool to our members, flagging the important role they have in supporting their governments. Of course, the employers federations are not the primary targets, but we would really encourage governments to reach out to the employers federation. So maybe as a way forward, if I can just put some food for thought as we enter also this conversation with others in this meeting, it's about thinking about creating institutional mechanisms like joint multi-stakeholder committees that could be created to evaluate the effectiveness and the efficiency of the agreement. Thinking in the design of the agreement, how such multi-stakeholder committees could be created exactly to monitor and to evaluate whether the agreement has been effective or not, and how to move from there. So I'm really happy, delighted to be here and to listen also from participants and from Paula as well.
Yeah, Stephanie, it's excellent. I saw a lot of nodding from Paula. I saw a lot of nodding from the Deputy Minister as you were speaking, and to underscore the point that you made, that the guidance needs to complement existing migration governance efforts and not substitute. What I've also heard you say, which aligns beautifully with what the Deputy Minister also spoke of, you spoke about this being an opportunity for thorough implementation. Deputy Minister spoke about Costa Rica's commitment to human rights already existing, and how this guidance opens up the opportunity to really move forward towards a faster and more effective implementation. Now, you answered my next question already, Stephanie. My next question to you would have been, how do we involve all stakeholders? And I've heard you say we need to have buy-in at the top of mind. We need to consult from the onset. We need to also think about institutional mechanisms that could be composed of multi-stakeholder committees. So we're putting that in the bag, and I think Marina and Michelle are listening closely, because you've already begun to respond to some of the questions and provocations that they put to us. Paula, allow me to come to you at this moment. Thank you so much for your patience. And I'm really keen to also just bring your voice from the perspective of labor as you reflect on the benefit of the guidance, but also maybe you can comment, Paula, on how we can do a better job of integrating social dialogue into the negotiation, the implementation, and the monitoring of these bilateral labor migration agreements. So let me give you the floor for a few minutes, Paula. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nozipo, and let me also salute my colleagues in this panel, Madame Rojas and Stephanie. I'm very glad to be with them today, and of course the colleagues from the ILO, Michelle and IOM. So I would like also to take this occasion to reinforce also what Stephanie was saying, that these bilateral labor agreements, of course, are an important tool in the governance of the labor migration, but they should be in no way, undermining or replace states' obligation to respect human rights and international labor standards. And the guidance, this important guidance, is there to reinforce these norms and standards that should go hand in hand with the ratification of the UN ILO Convention on Migrant Workers. So this is the first things that I would like to highlight when it comes to the relevance and the importance of these guidelines, to which we have contributed as ITUC and other Global Union Federation to draft, and we are really grateful to the leading role of the ILO and together with the IOM to being able to successfully land on this important piece of work. So, as it was said, indeed, the Labour Migration Agreement are key tools for the Global Compact. Objective 5, Stephanie mentioned, but also very much since 18, I very much agree with her, but also more widely on the SDGs, on the Agenda 2030, because of course we have SDG 8, that it's about protecting labor rights, promote safe and secure working environments for all workers, including, of course, migrant workers, in particular women migrants and those in precarious employment. So this is really a major piece when it comes to the sustainability of our future agenda, when it comes, especially now with recovery and resilience. And this guidance it's really timely because we are living, a difficult period indeed of crisis where, the economic crisis brought along restriction on freedom and labor rights violation worldwide. And this includes international labor standards violation, non-compliance with labor regulation regarding, for example, layoff, working hours and wage payment, and, also occupational health and safety. So the pre-existing, I would say, labor market deficiencies, even before the crisis.
Paula, I think we've just lost you in that last comment. I think you got muted by mistake. So let's rewind about 3 seconds. Just rewind about 3 seconds.
Sorry, so I think you lost me when I said that the crisis impacted already the most vulnerable people, that they were already vulnerable even before the crisis. And this, of course, this is very much related to the migrant workers who were, the one that already low-skilled workers, informal workers, women and young people. So I'm saying that this guidance it's very timely also in this time frame when we have to frame how we want recovery and resilience to be measures to be put in place. So if I have to pick very quickly key issues and key principles of this guidance that are very close to our agenda as trade unions is, of course, the migrant workers' protection. So compliance with labor rights, fundamental principles of right and work, freedom of association, and effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining with appropriate labor inspector coverage. So non-discrimination and equality of treatment are obviously crucial. And within this, let me indeed highlight the elimination of gender-based violence and harassment as a non-negotiable factor to gender equal labor market. So C190 Convention 119 and Recommendation 206, we want them, to be ratified and implemented everywhere. Freedom of movement, second, crucial issues. So hideous practices as document confiscating are serious violation of human labor rights. It was under the Kampala systems, and we saw it very bluntly. The migration status, again, we want to maximize opportunities for regularization of migrants, and we need a global migration strategy, of course, and the bilateral agreements are a precious tool in that, in order to foster regular employment. So, and then, of course, another key factor is recruitment, and let me underline that, because competitive advantage in the global economy cannot be based on the exploitation of workers, being them local or migrants. So respect for international labor standards and fundamental principles of rights at work are key when it comes to ethical and fair recruitment. So the ILO general principles and operational guidelines for fair recruitment are a milestone in our view in this respect and set the global standards under the auspices of a multilateral organization. So we really want to underline the role of these guidelines and overall the role of the ILO in when it comes to fair recruitment. Social protection, portability of social protection benefits. It's another major stepstone where social dialogue again is of fundamental priorities, like in other areas. And then, as Stephanie said, the skills recognition. Here again, we are part of the working group within the UN Migration, together with other organizations. But we know that skill recognition can actually improve the position of migrants in the labor market. But it should be one part of an overall solution, because many see legal pathway only for talents or super skilled migrants. But we know that the reality is not like that, right? Mm-hmm. So the reality is that low and medium skilled migrants will be the majority of the migrant population. So we need a skills recognition system that, are embedded, in public regulatory frameworks that are accessible and for all, and actually are the basis for an equal treatment, for equal treatment that prevent abuses and also allow wider access than to the super skilled worker. And then in that sense, tripartite social dialogue is crucial to come up with this public regulatory framework that, are the basis also to building trust and transparency amongst actors. And then last but not least, I know that I'm fighting against time, but last but not least, let me also remind that all these elements that are embedded in this guidance actually reflect our global call for a new social contract. Because when we call for a new social contract, the key workers demand at global level, we talk about the creation of jobs, creation of decent jobs based on ILO labor standards and of course rights. If we think about the ILO Centenary Declaration, so protection for workers and of course migrants at the forefront, we call for universal social protection. I was saying before, the portability of schemes and recognition is at the basis of that. And then of course equality and inclusion. And this means, like all the issues that have been going through, especially for women migrant workers. So of course, the new social contract will not stop migration, but of course it will make it easier to implement policies to govern, to make a decent governance and to step up with the decent governance of migration globally. But I'll stop here, and sorry if I went over with the time, Rosita. Thanks.
It's Paula, thank you so much. I must say that this conversation is really evidence of the level of engagement that is already taking place with the guidance. So to Marina and Michelle, certainly engaged. And I'm just listening to you, Paula, and listening to how you've already begun to look at the various principles and the components. Of course, looking at some of the sector-specific issues. And really the purpose of this part of our program was really just to begin to open up the conversation. The bigger invitation is for you to really embrace the guidance, to work with it, to unpack it, to analyze it, to bring it closer into your own space and begin to look at how it might be effectively applied. And so no apologies required for taking a long time. I think it is the nature of this type of conversation. What I am seeing is I am seeing Mr. Alcantara on my screen. It's a cue for me to say, Nozi, we are standing by. We're also here and we've got a lot to say and we've got some statements we want to make. So stay on camera, sir, because I am coming to you now. I'm going to invite Mr. Levinson Alcantara as I now go into an opportunity for us to hear some statements, to hear some responses to the guidance. He is, of course, as I said earlier, the director at the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration. And I'm going to give you the floor now, Mr. Alcantara.
Thanks much, Nozipo. Good evening from the Philippines. And on behalf of the Philippine government as a whole and my organization, the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, we just wish to congratulate the UN agencies, ILO and IOM, as well as global partners advocating for the rights of migrant workers in spearheading this initiative. The Philippines, as you might know, has 55 bilateral labor agreements in effect to date, some general in coverage, some occupation and employment program specific, with varying successes in the implementation. And so we welcome and support the launch of the guidance, as we see that the country's past experiences in crafting, entering into and implementing bilateral labor agreements can be further informed. These bilateral labor agreements have taught us important lessons. We learned that the success of agreements depend on how directly they address the concerns such as supply-demand gaps, cost of migration, institutional arrangements for deployment and entry, complying with skills qualifications and credentialing, harmonizing standards of employment between bilateral partners, and harmonizing regulatory frameworks on both sides. More importantly, our experiences with our BLAs teach us that the inclusiveness in the manner by which they are formulated, implemented, and reviewed with the stakeholders that they are meant to protect, the migrant workers, their associations, and the communities from where they come and to where they work. And as we are now ushered into the now normal, we pin much hope on the global guidance on bilateral migration agreements as an effective set of tools to achieve the objectives in line with the global compact on migration. The guidance has strong potentials of sustaining country efforts in advocating for the right to decent and gainful employment, as well as social protection, assured minimum employment standards due the migrant workers, and in times of emergencies, such as climate-induced migration and pandemics, their right to access health services and their right to safe return and reintegration to their countries of origin when needed. So the guidance can help us underscore the importance of co-management of global workers, holding accountable the countries of origin and the countries of destination alike. Recent events have highlighted the need for the sustainable deployment of, for example, global healthcare professionals and seafarers, where and when they are needed most. These and other emerging concerns can be answered by well-crafted bilateral labor migration agreements. So kudos again to the ILO and IOM. We are hopeful that through this guidance, more bilateral partners come to the negotiating table and spark conversations centering on the rights of migrant workers while reaping economic, social, and cultural benefits for all. Thank you, Your Excellencies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alcantara. I think the kudos and congratulations is reverberating around the virtual room. And of course, you spoke a direct challenge into the space today. You've said, in order for us to ensure maximum success, we need to ensure that the guidance speaks to the real challenges on the ground. And so the sharpness of that guidance is very, very important. Of course, we did see Michelle and Marina earlier on saying an invitation to countries to put up their hand for piloting. And certainly, I'm sure that's an invitation that we're all leaning into and listening into. Thank you very much, Mr. Alcantara. Ladies and gentlemen, let me invite the Permanent Mission of Portugal to the United Nations office and other international organizations in Geneva. I believe that's Mr. Mario Martins, who's on my screen right now. And so let me give you an opportunity, sir, to relay your statement and your message today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon to all of you. And thank you for giving us this opportunity to share with you some thoughts and some ideas about our experience in such an important topic. Let me start by welcoming the presentation of these important guidelines and to recognize ILO and IOM, as well as Michelle and Marina, for their work developed over the past almost 2 years on this front. We believe that this guidance can help shape rights-based bilateral labor migration agreements, which are an important tool to enhance pathways for safe, orderly, and regular migration. The negotiation of international labor mobility agreements, in our opinion, is a way to find solutions for the lack or shortage of workers in certain industries and services that the local labor market is not able to supply. They also, in our opinion, provide for the respect of the signatories' international obligations and seek to ensure the full respect of the human rights of the workers. And at the same time, they translate a mutual recognition by the parties of the need of combating irregular migration and traffic of human beings. Therefore, opening a legal pathway on this front or on this matter may go a long way in curtailing illegal immigration flows and in destroying the business models of criminal organizations fed on the desperation of the more vulnerable. Portugal is committed with the principle of labor mobility. It is certain, and this commitment is clearly identified under item 21 of our national plan for the implementation of the GCM, in line with its objective 23. In this spirit, let me tell you a little bit now about our concrete experience. We have recently concluded 2 bilateral agreements on labor mobility, one with India in September of 21, and one with Morocco very recently, just last month in January 22. On a multilateral level, and in the same spirit, Portugal promoted the negotiation of a mobility agreement within the members of CPLP, which is the community of the Portuguese-speaking countries. And this agreement was signed in Luanda, Angola, last 17th of July, during the summit of the heads of state and government. Let me highlight 3 principles that we consider to be key in this legal framework or in these legal texts. Equality before the law, opening of legal pathways for migration, and the respect for the dignity and human rights of migrants. And under this legal framework, foreign workers will benefit from the same rights and obligations in the same conditions as native workers, with equal pay and equal workload. It is a demand-driven process, meaning that foreign workers arrive in Portugal already with their labor contract issued under the terms of Portuguese law. And this process will allow for more transparency, avoiding all or most of the pitfalls of exploitation. Furthermore, Portugal is also a member of IRIS, Global Policy Network on Recruitment, and has co-hosted with IOM in September 2020 a workshop for government officials under the topic regulating labor mobility in Portugal in line with labor market needs. So we are committed, we are giving our steps on this direction, and we continue to look forward to work and cooperating with you and with all other global partners on such an important issue. Thank you so much for allowing us to share this experience and for the launching of the guidance today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martins, for sharing your experience with us as well, and also the aspirations for the guidance, a legal pathway that does away with the exploitation of migrant workers. You also spoke about the importance of equaling the playing field and ensuring that everyone is equal before the law. And this becomes a concrete way in which the respect and dignity of migrant workers can be honored. So we've heard you loudly and clearly, and thank you very much for that contribution. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if there's one thing that Marina and Michelle did, is that they showed up in true partnership and with a collaborative posture. And so in the couple of minutes that we have before we end, I'd like to open the floor and invite if there's anyone who would like to make a statement. There are a number of organizations that are represented today, organizations that have not only been actively involved in terms of getting the guidance to this point, but also have active interest in the success through the application and the monitoring of the guidance. And so I'll invite you to use the reaction at the bottom of your screen. You can just put a hand up and I will come to you and I will give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and, of course, to make a statement. So I am scanning my screen. I do want to make sure that I don't miss anyone who would really like to contribute to this conversation and to use their voice in this conversation. And as I'm scanning at this moment, I'm not seeing any hands up at this moment. Marina's popped back up. Marina, I wonder whether that's a sign that you would like to say something. So let me give you an opportunity to unmute and let's hear your voice for a few seconds.
No, thank you, Nazi, and thank you, everyone. It was just so amazing, colleagues, partners, to hear your feedback, ideas, suggestions, a little bit of criticism as well. I like this comment saying that the agreement itself is not the solution. It has to be placed within broader context. No, absolutely. I'm just popping up my screen because I think we are getting towards the last minutes of our meeting today. But again, wanted to thank everyone, especially our partners from the governments, those who were joining us. I don't know which time of the morning in Costa Rica it is now. I don't want to know, but many thanks, as well as from the Philippines evening. So we see that geographically we managed to bring the audience from different parts of the world. And indeed, that's not just we are starting from that. That's being placed within the context of our ongoing work with all of you through our country offices, regional offices, and ongoing partnerships. So for us, it's just another format of collaboration. So I think we would really like to hear maybe concretely in terms of 2022, as I was saying in my slides, okay, concretely, where do we take it from here? So the guidelines is there. I saw the request to translate it into Arabic. So again, we are capturing all the comments today. And thank you again, all the colleagues who were responding to some of the questions and very valid suggestions from the audience. But maybe we really use the last minutes towards that end and see whether there are some ideas in terms of concrete applications.
Absolutely, Marina, and I do see a couple of hands up. So Lilana, I will come to you. Fabio, thank you for a really great message in the chat as well. Fabio saying, congratulations on this amazing work. The guidance will indeed support our work in Mesoamerica and the Caribbean, promoting better BLMSA design, implementation, and evaluation. Turia has also got a hand up, so I will come to Turia. But I also just I know that Priscilla is online. So Priscilla, if you would also maybe just want to give us a short comment. We know you've done quite a lot of work on bilateral agreements. And so I just have 10 minutes. I'm going to give each person two minutes each before we begin to wrap up the conversation and maybe have a word from Michelle as well before we close. But for now, let me go to Lilana. Your hand's been up for a while. Let me give you 2 minutes on the floor.
Thanks very much. So I'm Lilana from PICOM. It's the platform for undocumented migrants. We were also involved in the development of this guidance. So I just wanted to share also from our side briefly how we really find it crucial from our network, because on the ground we see that often bilateral labour migration agreements, as they're in place at the moment, don't adequately integrate protections for workers, and in some cases are actually systematizing very short-term precarious labour migration between two countries. And I think the data that was also shared at the beginning by Michelle also illustrates some of that. So it's really crucial for us to see that this guidance is an opportunity to put the rights of migrant workers at the forefront of bilateral labour migration agreements and how that is part of an effective labour migration policy. So for us, I mean, the recommendations should be seen as a whole. Other partners have highlighted a few things. I wanted to highlight just a couple of aspects that are crucial for us. Protecting workers and their families in case of loss or change of employment. So looking at those kinds of aspects,
the migration status, on the clear and transparent procedures around extension and renewal, and also pathways to longer-term status and citizenship. And of course, as everybody's been saying, around labour rights, equal treatment and effective remedy, including when workers are undocumented. So these are key aspects that we see can either lead to exploitation and precarity and irregularity, or can promote decent work and inclusion. So those are really important to highlight. And just lastly, because I don't want to take too much time, also really underlining the importance of listening to migrant workers themselves, having representatives around the table. The process was an example of that. We were happy to be involved, and we're really happy to continue to work with all the different stakeholders to improve labour migration policies. A lot of the guidance is relevant also for the labour migration policies more broadly. So we'd like to see that in that context. Thank you.
Lilana, thank you. Thank you very much. And as you're speaking, I'm seeing a lot of nods on my screen, so lots of resonance with many of the ideas that you've put forward. And let me swiftly go to Turia Lahir and invite Turia to take the floor. I see your hand's been up for a while. Turia, if you're speaking, you're muted. Okay, I can't hear you, Turia, and hopefully I might, time permitting, get an opportunity to come back. I did want to pick up on a really great contribution from the FAO, that is from Jacqueline. Jacqueline, I wonder whether if you would like to maybe make that comment by unmuting yourself as you talk about, from an FAO perspective. I'd love to give you the floor for 1 minute.
Excuse me, I'm Thuraya Al-Ara.
Ladies and gentlemen, Turia is now audible. So let me give Turia the opportunity just to contribute. And so Turia, the floor is yours for 1 minute.
First of all, I would like to congratulate us all and congratulate all the panelists and all the actors for this great webinar and for this guidance. Some of the things that we would like to highlight is that we really agree that this guidance is aiming at putting the rights of the migrants and human rights at the heart of our effort, as well as social rights. I did not hear much about the pandemic and its impact, as if the world has stopped when we were under the pandemic, especially for irregular migrants, because the migrants that are regular and that have legal contracts face different challenges because they have some rights that they enjoy. However, under the pandemic, this made us rethink about a different aspect when it comes to how to deal with migrants. For us, the availability of vaccines for labor migrants in an unconditional manner, even for irregular migrants, and also to ensure follow-up. Because you know that under the pandemic, there was an increase in unemployment rates in many countries. And when you see an increase of unemployment rates, it's the migrant labor that will be paying the price. And that's why you will see also the xenophobia that will be on the rise. And this is something we needed to highlight. Thank you.
Turia, thank you very much. And I think this is exactly the invitation that was extended, the opportunity to really look in and begin to look at some of the nuances. And you've raised the issue of regular versus irregular migrants and saying, let's have a closer conversation around that. I know that when Michelle started off, she did speak about the impact of COVID-19. But what I'm hearing you saying is, let's tune in a little bit more. Let's really get into the nuance of that impact. So thank you for that contribution, Turia, and I certainly am confident that it's adding value into the conversation. One of the things that I think Marina spoke about was this is also about a conversation where the ask is give us feedback, and I think there's been some really rich and really valuable feedback that's also come out of the conversation today. And so we are really wrapping up the conversation now. Marina, your hand is up. I'd like to give you the floor once again. And then Michelle, I'll give you an opportunity before we begin to wrap. I do just want to acknowledge the very rich engagement that's happening on the chat, and just to say, please do look out for Vasily. He's put in a comment there with his email address and a massive invitation to stay in touch and to keep in contact. So don't miss that message in the chat. Marina, let me come back to you.
Yeah, let me just very briefly respond to the topic of irregularity and informality of migrants. This is a very important point, because what we have been presenting today is really the way of maybe enhancing the impact of intergovernmental mechanisms of regulation. So really something which looks into the situation of those who really have documentation, so the regular pathway regulation. But really the informalities, the status of migrants, the identity is such a crucial aspect to that. And indeed, as you were correctly saying, the COVID-19 really put that solidly on our agendas. Just from our side, we really are taking it very seriously. So of course, we're looking to the issues of social protection, where our law colleagues are taking lead. It is an agenda of the whole of UN organizations. From our end, also for us, we are just launching a legal identity strategy within our organization, where really we will try to work with the governments, those who are regulating migration flows, to ensure that we are not forgetting about those who do not have documents, who really are losing those documents. And this is where we can testify to some interesting examples in countries like Colombia, where they were really looking into the situation of regularizing the status. That's not the solution. No, we're not saying that that's the way forward, but really how we can create the migration institutes and processes so that migrants don't get into that situation. So preemptive responses. And then the final word from myself, indeed, please stay in touch. We have the contacts of everybody who registered. We will be engaging through the network towards our champion countries, really looking forward to hopefully working tangibly with some of you in 2022 already. Thank you, everyone, and over to Michelle.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I know you're about to jump right in, but I wanted to just lift a voice in the chat, which I thought was such a beautiful message from Edwin Riga. Edwin says, firstly, congratulations on this great work. This will complement the African Union member states' guidelines on developing bilateral labor agreements. And I think that really is in the spirit of the intent of this particular guidance. So I just wanted to lift Edwin's comments before I give you the floor, please, Michelle. Over to you.
No, thank you so much, Nosy. I saw that and was really excited to see. We actually have been supporting IOM, ILO, other colleagues of the AU, and even in IGAD, there's new guidance on bilateral labor migration agreements that are really drawing on a lot of the things we've been doing in the working group and drafts that we've had. So it's been a really rich collaboration, and I really hope and encourage other regional authorities to get in touch with us so that we can help you really look at the guidance, implement it, even just to explain in more detail the kinds of provisions in the guidance. We're available to help just the regions, individual countries, stakeholders. We've really put ourselves out there to support. And for IOM and ILO, this is a real priority. I can say that for ILO, we have, as Marina had mentioned, quite a number of issues that relate to this. New guidance on social protection for migrant workers that's been released and available. We'll be doing guidance work and capacity building on that. And we'll be looking to have this discussion within our own governing body, which is coming up just in a few weeks. It's central on the agenda. Let me pick up on something that was stated about the COVID-19 pandemic. And yes, the guidance, the conversation may not have been directed at that, but the guidance does include discussion of the COVID-19 pandemic or any crisis, and provides provisions on the need to incorporate this kind of potential crisis into bilateral agreements. What kind of aid can be given? What kind of health support? What kind of cooperation for return and reintegration? It really gets into some of those issues. So I would ask and encourage everyone to open the guidance and really examine the provisions that might be most relevant to you. But it certainly is very timely in terms of COVID. In just a few remarks I picked up on, and I was really excited to hear the interventions of all the colleagues, but the issue of national frameworks and national frameworks based on international standards on human rights absolutely have to be put in place. And of course, at the ILO, we encourage ratification of all of the conventions and certainly our specific conventions on migrant workers as a baseline. So indeed, the bilateral agreements tool is not a replacement for any kind of national framework. This is really important. Some countries don't even have national policies on labor migration. This is really something to focus on. And the bilateral labor migration agreement guidance can really provide more of a complement and a tool to help look at how you can put those together. It's not just a tool to craft bilateral agreements, it really expands on all of the issues important to the national frameworks. In looking at, of course, the implementation of bilateral agreements and looking at how are our bilateral agreements doing today, I think this really is another encouragement for countries to use the guidance to evaluate that, take another look at these agreements that you have. The Philippines mentioned so many that they have, and of course, we'd be happy to support, all of us to support further work. But even with existing bilateral agreements, the guidance can give a sense of whether there are still gaps, whether there's a need for revision, and of course, in creating new agreements. So I just end, Nosy, on the last point that you had made over and over. We're available, we're here. It's a priority for us to support you, and really thank you all for participating and your amazing comments and your the excitement that you built around this launch. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. With less than a minute to go, there's nothing more to add other than to say, if it's morning, have a great day. If it's afternoon or evening, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. From myself here in Johannesburg, South Africa, it is goodbye for now.